Hey, we are two Star Wars nerds, and today we are talking about the Mortis arc. So, getting into the Mortis arc, we have these headphones on because we're actually going to be watching something with you guys. But this is, got our notes here. This is in season 3 successive episodes. We have 315, 316, and 317. This is Overlords, Altar of Mortis, and Ghosts of Mortis. And so, even right off the bat, before we get into it, I think this is the best way to approach it. We'll give very high-level overview. We'll watch this video in a second of Dave Filoni talking about this, and then we can go into our thoughts.
And I think it's an important disclaimer is we actually watched and recorded, well, we've seen this multiple times.
Yeah, many.
But we watched and recorded this probably almost a year ago. And we're not really fans of Mortis, and it came out as he was editing. He said...
well, there was two problems. The first problem was that it was rather negative right off the bat, or we seemed like we were pretty angry. And then second, the audio, I had some audio settings set up and it actually screwed it up.
And we try not to be angry. So we're not going to change our opinion, but we're going to be more optimistic in how we present and talk about it, maybe.
Yeah, so if you don't know, if you haven't seen Mortis, essentially what happens is you have Obi-Wan, Ahsoka, and Anakin who receive like a 2,000, well actually the council receives it, I guess, a 2,000-year-old distress call, or I guess a 2,000-year-old Jedi code distress call that from a certain region, they can't really tell where it is. They go there, I think with Rex. They go there with Rex.
Yeah, Rex is on another
yeah. And they go and there's this weird, I don't know, almost like Tesseract, this weird like thing floating in space.
We're not sure if it's a planet actually or what.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like a planet, but they refer to it as a planet.
Yeah, so you don't really know what it is, and they go into it, and then they're basically transported kind of to this like weird planet, and they meet the father, the son, and the daughter. The father, basically these are the Mortis gods. The father is kind of like the neutral balance. The son has been more like the embodiment of evil force or like dark force. And then the daughter is like kind of the embodiment of light force and good and like sacrifice and selflessness. And the other side is like selfishness. And so you get this really interesting kind of thing going on, and we're going to get into it, but basically it's all about kind of revealing Anakin's purpose as the chosen one, and you have some stuff with Ahsoka and her greatest fears, Obi-Wan kind of questioning reality, a lot of interesting stuff. So we're going to actually watch this because there's some questions, so we're going to watch actually a little featurette from the Clone Wars bonus features on DVD, and then we will talk about it. So
I've never seen this, so this is new.
So let's watch this. This is a bonus of physical content. We're watching it online, but let's watch this.
Documentary on the Mortis trilogy. Christian Taylor, who wrote the trilogy, and myself, we both firmly believe that we should really not answer directly a lot of the questions about Mortis. Was that really Qui-Gon Jinn that appeared to Obi-Wan in the cave or not? What does it mean that Ahsoka talks to her older self? Will she ever reach that age? Who was the father? What does it mean now that Anakin's the chosen one and that he has a better understanding of that? Ahsoka apparently died and she came back to life. Does that have any meaning? We have answers to those questions, for sure. But if I answer directly what something is, I feel that I'll be robbing you of the purpose of that arc, which is to make you wonder. It's to make you challenge certain ideas, to ask questions. There are many mysteries in Star Wars. There are many mysteries on the planet Mortis. I think George really started to delve back into the mythology that he created about the Force itself. And we started to see some of those elements be personified in the Father, the Son, and the Daughter. George is highly involved in all aspects of this series, but when we deal directly with the Force. Christian Taylor and I feel very strongly that, that word has to come directly from George. A lot of the notes from Mortis come from a really old binder that George has that has his original writings on what the Force is and what makes it up.
The core of the Force. I mean, you got the dark side, the light side. One is selfless, one is selfish. And you want to keep them in balance.
Slowly, over time, things will start to become more clear about Mortis. We aren't done exploring the nature of the Force and the kind of bigger mythical questions that we began to ask in the Mortis trilogy. Always in motion is the future, and the Clone Wars future is in motion right now, working on future episodes that will continue this rather intriguing arc that George has brought to light after many years.
Did they ever talk about Mortis again? Did I miss those episodes?
No, so in the Clone Wars, it's definitely not resolved. But, so if we're getting into it, obviously, stuff shows up in Rebels. Stuff's probably going to show up in the new shows and things like that. But let's get into just kind of overall thoughts. So we can get into some of these episodes, like the first one, Overlords. We already talked about this, and you saw Qui-Gon as a Force ghost. There's even a
Maybe.
Yeah, there's a Rebel Force radio interview where they talk about this, and basically they're like, is that really, the Force ghost, is it not, just all this kind of stuff. And again, that same thing, they essentially, all your questions can't be answered. They're all theory. They say they have an answer, which is interesting. I feel like if you're watching this, you know what Mortis is. If not,
I don't know what Mortis is.
Well, I mean, like the arc.
Oh,
if you're watching this, you probably know what the arc is.
Right.
So why don't we go over, maybe we can kind of do what we consider kind of like the positive, the negative, and the confusing kind of stuff. I feel like that's a good way to do it. So like positive, what are, I can start with some things, but what are some things where you're like, okay, that's cool.
I can only think of one.
Okay. Yeah, she really doesn't like this, by the way.
The one positive, I think, is just explaining that really George's heart behind the Force was, that the light, not necessarily the Jedi, but there's the light and it's selfless. Then there's the darker side, the evil side, and it's selfish. And that's
it?
Yeah, like just that revelation. Because
Okay.
I've always wondered, aren't the Jedi, they're the good guys, and yes, they're the good guys, and they're definitely more selfless, but there's still selfish parts of them, and that's why. That's why Count Dooku turned. That's why Anakin turns, because in a moment, if you're not being intentional and making the right choices, just because you're on one side doesn't mean. And then even at the end, Vader eventually goes back to the light side, so you're not stuck in one, and it's depending on, are you going to be selfless or selfish in this moment, rather than you're here forever.
Okay, fair enough. I think for me, in context of things like the planet is seen as a conduit of the Force from whatever Qui-Gon apparition, if it's truly him as a Force ghost or something else, we don't know. Supposedly there's answers, but we aren't told them. But okay, so the planet's like a Force conduit, and the stuff that you shared. I think some positive things is, for me, there's two. Maybe like a third cool thing. I'll start with the cool thing. It's cool to see Vader's theme come into play.
I did like that
at
too.
various points, because it's that very thing. It's kind of
and the Force play comes in at various points too. So I did like that aspect actually as well.
Yeah, so those themes coming in are cool. just because then you're seeing that interplay of Anakin being pulled. It does have a lot about Ahsoka and Obi-Wan, but it's more of an Anakin arc overall. I think it is cool to see him wrestle with like realizing he's the chosen one, but then he like realizes what he's going to do, and they erase his mind. So it just seemed, and maybe that gets into the confusing. There just seems like there's some decisions made where not much really changes necessarily. Like,
We'll stick to the positive.
okay, yeah.
You're jumping ahead.
And then I think the last thing for me that was positive is that it's different than the other Clone War arcs because it's trying to get back to the mythology, and it's trying to get into some of those bigger questions. And so it does make you stop and talk more. Like usually, this is usually an arc. It seems like people either love it or I don't know if people hate it, but they're like not so hot on it. So it feels like it is because there's so many talking points that come up in it. So then if we get into things we don't like, to be fair, normally we don't do this. We try and stay super positive, but I feel like there's certain ones where I think there's just a little bit more
maybe it's
don't like.
Maybe it's not necessarily even things we don't like, it's things we don't understand. And they're not really helpful to the story, so they kind of just confuse us.
I will say I didn't really like, things I didn't like, I didn't really like the embodiment of like the son as the gargoyle and the daughter. There's just some weird stuff that I'm like, it just really didn't feel like
Star Wars.
It's supposedly straight from George, so I guess that's pretty much pure Star Wars.
It's as pure as it gets.
Doesn't mean I have to like it. But so we can just go to confusing things. What are some confusing things?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily wrong to say things we don't like, but we don't like them because we don't really understand that.
Sure.
So that's more so what I was saying. But I think the biggest thing for me is I'm essentially invested into like an hour of this arc, 20, 20, 20, or maybe 22, 22, 22. So almost minutes each of this 3 arc, and then at the end nothing's changed, everything's the same, and you don't ever really acknowledge it again.
Yeah.
And so then I'm like, well, what was the point? Like I understand why they had to erase Anakin's memory because it just I think it would have changed the story, honestly.
Revenge of the Sith happens.
Right.
It can't.
So I understand that, but it's just weird that they at the end of the arc, and then they come out and they're like, oh yeah, sorry, Rex, we've been gone, and he's like, for a long time, and Rex is like, you've been gone for like
a moment,
and then you see, you're like, okay, well they know they've been gone, so they remember at least aspects of Mortis, and then just it isn't really ever brought up again. There's like the minor, they're not necessarily minor details, but like the bird.
I think it's Mordecai.
Mordecai eventually shows up with Ahsoka, and so that obviously that's a drawback to Mortis. But I don't know, I just feel like there's this hour of content, and then we just move on, and it's never really addressed again. And I'm like, maybe I think honestly, if it was more fleshed out and things were answered, I would like it more. But like to me, it seemed like kind of like it's not like I'll never. Obviously, I've watched it multiple times, so I don't like despise it, but every time I watch it at the end I'm like, what was the point of that arc?
Yeah, and I wonder if like way down the road, if it is like Anakin's going to become like the father, and
he's dead.
What do you mean?
Anakin dies.
No, I understand that he dies, but like maybe much like this reminds me a lot of Lost, if I'm being honest, because Lost has a lot of really good stuff and there's a lot of intrigue, and then once they start getting into the mythology, that's where Lost really starts to kind of like break down,
right, and
it loses a lot of its strength. I feel like Mortis is the same, because you have Jacob in Lost. If you know Lost, if you don't, forgive me.
Just pretend.
I love Lost. But you have Jacob in Lost who draws everybody to the island, And then you even have like the Man in Black, kind of this contention thing going on. And then you have
light and dark.
You have the mother who is meant to be balanced, right? Just this kind of timeless tale, but then things really break down once you get more into the mythology, and you're like, well,
that makes sense.
Okay, but the whole idea is you kind of like defeat the darkness, and then you protect, the island, and all this, and like that's how Hugo or Hurley becomes essentially like kind of Jacob again, which the father draws them with the code and is doing the same thing and is trying to make Anakin the balance because he's the chosen one. And so it's like you get a lot of the similarity. So I'm like, all of that said, I'm like, if they were able to do everything they want, maybe they will. Filoni will. So
to like bring Anakin back from the dead to be the father?
No, maybe like in the Force he becomes the father at Mortis, maybe. I don't know. Or maybe...
And who's the daughter and the son?
Ahsoka, the daughter, son, I don't know. Maybe I'm just out of it. But it's their theories, Is
that a theory or just...
No, I'm just saying,
okay.
To understand Mortis, there's all these theories you have to run through. The only change, realistically, is Ahsoka. Because we need the question answered. Did she really die?
Right.
And the life essence of the daughter, did that really go into Ahsoka? Because then you see the Mordecai, so you see that whole bird follow through and World Between Worlds and all this stuff.
When does the bird come?
I don't know, I think it's Rebels.
It's Rebels, right.
Yeah.
So then it just, years later it shows up. Doesn't even come right away.
Yeah, not in Clone Wars, to my knowledge. Maybe in season 7, which is like Disney stuff.
Right.
I think. But anyway,
I don't remember. Yeah.
I think for what it's worth, I think a lot of this is meant to be like Dagobah. It's supposed to be like the Dagobah of the Clone Wars, like where Luke goes into the cave.
Dagobah made a lot more sense.
Yeah. But then it's like he faces this fear in the Force, and it's this embodiment that he is the evil, like that he will become the evil, and all this kind of prophetic stuff in the Force. So maybe that's what they were going for. I feel like that is what they were going for in the Clone Wars. But it's just interesting because, like you said, it's brought up, and then it doesn't get brought up in Clone Wars really again. You think they would be like, let's talk about
this. It's pretty important.
They just keep it to themselves. But are there any final thoughts you have about this? Because there's a lot of details we didn't get into. This is more so just kind of the trying to figure out the mythology of the arc, which I guess for Dave Filoni, he said that's what they wanted. They wanted people to try and figure stuff out.
Right.
But do you have any...
He got what he wanted.
Final thoughts and a rating overall for you?
No, I feel like I don't really have any other final thoughts. Like, those are my thoughts.
Okay.
I've said them all, I think. Yeah, I did, like you said, though, you brought up, I did like the music, like those minor changes. Actually, one thing I did think was cool was when Anakin's seeing the future and just like the different things passing by, and then the Vader mask. That's cool. But yeah, that's me digging. My final thoughts.
And I guess you do get interesting things, like you get Shmi coming, you get older Ahsoka coming.
Well, that wasn't really Shmi. We saw Shmi wasn't
True,
real.
yeah.
That was the brother.
But then you see it played off of, I guess, his feelings for his mom. Even though it was the brother. But you get some interesting things. Okay, so what's your rating out of 10 for this arc?
2.
2? Oh man, that's crazy. You really don't like it. Dang, we didn't talk about the ratings before, so that one did catch me by surprise. I think for me it's a 6. A 6 out of 10.
Yeah. So you like it?
I think I like it for what they're trying.
So it's over mediocre for you?
I feel like
60%?
I feel like
so it's passing.
Barely passing for me. Because of what they attempted.
If they would have fleshed it out more. I would be fine with it, and it would have a way higher score.
Maybe, or maybe you wouldn't like the answers, and it could.
Well, here's the thing, though. I can not like the answers, but if it's from the creator, I can respect things, and I have closure.
True.
Now with Disney, it's not from the creator. It's gonna, even if they give me answers, they're not gonna be from George.
Yeah, Filoni answers.
Yeah.
At best. Okay, but yeah, I think 6 for me, just because it tries things and it touches on some things that are for Clone Wars.
As you fell asleep watching it.
I did.
This guy gives it a 6. Can't even stay awake.
Because I think it starts really strong. I think the first episode is the strongest.
Yeah.
I think the second is, like, some of the plot points don't really make sense to me, but I feel like for a 20-minute kids show, I feel like it does get a 6 out of 10. Can't necessarily keep me awake, but it did get a 6 out of 10.
I stayed awake the whole time, at least.
But yeah, so with that, this is maybe a little bit longer for the arcs.
But I feel like we were more positive than before.
Yeah, the other one, I think, I don't know, we were upset about something before. I don't know what it was, but
probably some Disney thing.
If you want it late, join our Patreon and we'll put the angry review. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, just so if you didn't know, we actually do have a book club podcast where we're going through everything in the EU, and we do also have a Patreon. But with that, we are 2 Star Wars nerds, and may the Force be with you always. Hey, so we just wanted to tell you really quickly that we have a way that you can support our channel. Obviously, subscribing and liking and commenting are all free. But if you want to support us financially, we actually have a Patreon membership page. And so if you didn't know, kind of the long journey we've been on is for the better half of more than a year. We've been trying to be monetized. We've had all the metrics hit, and YouTube has rejected us over and over and over and over and over again.
Yes.
And for this very simple thing, they say that our content is reused content. And so what we decided to do is give up on trying to be monetized ever through YouTube, because
it's a waste of time.
Yeah, we've definitely hit a brick wall there. But if you want to support things like the Book Club podcast or just future episodes, just help us produce more, we have some different options there.